Welcome back to Connecting the Dots, the podcast that cut through the noise of modern marketing by talking to people who actually made it work. Today with me, I have Alexander Matt, former Global CMO at Fjällräven, but also brand enthusiast. He has been working for the most iconic brands you can think about, Levi's, Fjällräven, and Adidas Original. And today, we're going to talk about what it takes to build a culturally relevant brand, and brand that people love, stay loyal to, and fight for. So if you're passionate about branding, or if you're trying to build a brand that survives the trends, this episode is for you. So you have been working for a lot of really interesting brands, right? We could call them, some of them legacy brand, but that's something that we'll need to discuss because that's not a term that you love. But what is one brand that you really love, you are really loyal to, and one that has really disappointed you recently?
Yeah, you know what's actually really interesting? It's really hard for me to say and to mention one brand, but it's literally all the brands I work with pretty much. I strongly still today believe in and connected to. I'm wearing my Stan Smith shoes, my Levi's jeans. I have all my outdoor gear and love it just from Fjällräven.
Yeah.
I really believe in them, and somehow a part of me became them or the other way around, so I'm super, super connected still today. And we probably speak a little bit later more about why as well. And you asked me about which brand I would see critical. I'm German, part of me or my family is Swedish as well. And I feel super connected with Sweden, the country I live in. Why? Because I strongly believe in the values of this country as well, which partly also our family values. But of course, as a brand guy, I look also on Sweden as a brand. Yeah. Also as a German originally, how is it perceived from outside? And I'm concerned if you take this angle, because Sweden is standing up, for values pretty high in sustainability. For me, it stands for togetherness as well, freedom. And of course, we went through quite turbulent times in the last years, and some, are a little bit, I feel, under a little bit pressure. And I'm not just talking about governmental decisions. Also, I think what I feel a little bit in the everyday, and I think there's also, I'm not super alarmed, but I think there's a need to refocus probably also on these kind of super strong values. And I think they're so unique in the world, when you think about Sweden as a brand.
I like that. I didn't expect that that answer. But yeah, that's so true. If I think about Italy also, Italy has its own brand, which is very good in many things. But in other things, I'd say, that's something we should work on. What would you say is the best rebrand or brand that you've seen in the past, 10 years?
A rebrand?
Yeah.
Boy, that's really, really a tough question. I think there are so many. I value highly the brands, who somehow, because that's what you have to do, right? If you're a legacy heritage brand, you somehow have to reinvent constantly. You have to come back with high. And when I think about, recently who did a great job, it was a little bit away as well, because it's Levi's, I think they're really back again, and it's not so easy because it stands for American values, US values, right? Which are not necessarily at the moment so well taken, but I think they made really a good comeback here. So I think they do a great job there.
Nice. Okay. So, for the topic of today, we're going to be talking about how to build a culturally relevant brand, a legacy or iconic brand. And I know for you, these words are a little bit different, right? They mean different things. So what do you think, how would you define then a culturally relevant brand? And why do you like that more than legacy?
Yeah, let's start with legacy. What I don't like so much, I think legacy is so much connected to history, heritage. And at least for me, when I read that word, I feel we only talk about brands and companies who exist like centuries already, And I think you don't, as a cultural relevant brand, you don't necessarily need to exist already like 100 years, as such. That's why I don't necessarily like it so much. I think cultural relevant brands are those, in my opinion, who have a deeper meaning when it comes, for consumers, who have a point of view, who innovate and help people somehow to progress as well, make it into the hearts and people show up with, and have something to say out there and bring something additional, building on people needs. It sounds very theoretical, and it's not, but it's in the end, it's very practical.
Yeah, I understand. You said like legacy sounds like, a brand needs to be really, really old, right? And one of the things that I was thinking about is, okay, but you kind of need a little bit of that history, right? To make a culturally relevant brand, or no? Like, could a brand that is like, I don't know, 2-3 years old be relevant?
Absolutely. I think you can be relevant, but the question is for how long, right? And that's the art in the end, like to take this relevancy for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right? And that's, I think, that makes really strong brands. But just recently looking in the last couple of years, there's so many interesting, also culturally relevant brand, use the term, popping up. There are so many subcultures, microcultures, and of course through social media that gets also supported, so brands have much closer access. And there are definitely brands who bring something to the market, but the question is always, for how long, will they keep relevant, or is it just jumping on a trend?
Is there any brand that you have in mind?
What I'm particularly interested in, of course, looking a little bit on my background, is a bit the whole sportswear area. So much happened, right, in health, wellness, sports, all the leisure brands, or take cycling, or take yoga, for instance, right? It started many years ago, with Lululemon, or you take even Rafa in the cycling, right? And then a lot more today exists, of smaller brands, bigger ones, who go in a similar direction. So there's a lot happening, but it's really tough, right? But also the two ones I mentioned, for them it's tough now as well, because they got under pressure because so many new ones picked up, And what I personally always interested in are these brands, who really, as I mentioned before, who bring something in addition, something disruptive, and really something which probably didn't really exist before, right? And when you asked me about an example, when I think about, I just recently had the chance to dive deeper into, I don't know if you know it, do you know the Korean brand Gentle Monster?
No.
I think it was very inspiring. It's an eyewear brand from Korea. I think they exist already quite 10, 15 years, but they made it now really also internationally. And it's very interesting how they somehow bring the brand to life in a way which is very arty, experiential, disruptive. And they also innovated retail, right? With big installations. And it feels very Korean, but it's very global now. And I think something like that I feel very inspiring. And there are not so many, who I think really reinvent the wheel and create relevance on a totally different level. And
you touched upon a bit earlier, like there are certain things that you need to do, in your opinion, to be a culturally relevant brand. I know there's no, like, let's say, fixed recipe, right? But if you were to think about what are the pillars or the elements that make a brand a culturally relevant, iconic brand, could you think about some?
We are talking about consumer brands, right? And you need to put the consumer at your heart, the community at your heart. You had to be really good, and not just talking at people, but really thinking about how can you be an enabler for something, right? Help people to express themselves, inspire, getting into conversation. That's, community management and enabling communities. That's one topic. Another topic I'm thinking about is you have to have a very strong point of view. You have to stand for something which is bigger than a product as well. Product is important always, what you offer, right? But hey, you have to have a bigger purpose, something, you have to stand for emotions, which trigger some things in people's heart, and people really believe in you. That's also super important, right? And then it's all about how you bring that to life. Look at the landscape today when you activate your brand. You have so many channels, right? And every second something is popping up. So you need to be super consistent in bringing actually your brand to life, following same values. It doesn't matter where it is, which channel it is, product, communication, everything has to connect super closely.
Yeah. And everyone is talking about community nowadays. It's a very used word, right? From your experience, because you did work for brands that have a very strong community, right? What would you have to do to stay authentic towards your community and your target audience?
Needs to really baked into the brand, into the people working for the brand as well. I mean, you cannot just make a decision, hey, now I'm authentic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you need to be already most times, when you work for a certain brand who has a cultural value, you have people in the brand who are from the core, who understand, but you also have very close connections to the community as well. Involve them in product design even. That's what we did, right? Or get a point of view, or, be open and think more as a platform to get them in, listen, be able to adapt. That's kind of the spirit for authenticity in order to be also credible. Yeah, you need to be quite good and have a high EQ in order to be successful.
Is there anything that you would say you could share about, maybe initiatives that you did, or something where you really felt like this really helped building this community for us?
I have different examples because I'm driven by the idea of community and embed really brands into communities in an authentic way. At Fjällräven, I worked 5 years. I can give you an example. This is a brand which is built on a very strong, loyal fan base all over the world. And what Fjällräven makes really, really well are events all over the world. There were already since many years, tracking events. We also had always, it was called Polar, or it's called Fjällräven Polar, which is like a husky dog sled experience in the Arctic, but it's only for 20 people, right? But it's such a inspiring experience. If people hear about, I mean, so many people in the world want to be part of it, And what we did in the last years, that we brought this, let's say, offline event, into social media as well. And we created an Instagram activation with 3 challenges and pretty much organically driven as well. And it created a huge wave, and super happy how that developed. As a brand, Fjällräven, I mean, you have to deal with a lot of bigger brands, a challenger brand. You need to find creative ways to create awareness. In the end, people started to share, and we had more than 7,000 went through 3 challenges, Instagram challenges, and then got millions of impressions. That helped us massively during the highest commercial time in autumn, because in the end, what they all were fighting for are getting one of these 20 seats at this experience. And this is something, which went for 3-4 weeks and will happen now this autumn again, but helped to create a huge experience and huge awareness and helped us to grow the community massively, get more people into the brand.
Yeah, I wish I could have applied for that. Not that I will be able to do that, but okay. And community is kind of a big word nowadays, and especially with social media, a lot of brands are trying to tap into communities through social media as well, and some through events and other activations. Is there anything that you see brands sometimes get wrong when they're trying to build these communities?
Yeah, of course. In the end, it all comes back to authenticity, right? If you want to be too much something and you are not, right, that can go quite wrong. Back in the days, you talked about influencers. Now you talk about creators, right? That's just one topic I see a lot, that you work with external ambassadors who just not matching your brand, for instance, right? And you try too hard and buy people into the brand. From my experience, it needs to happen pretty much organically as well. I don't necessarily believe in long-term value in building your success on purely influencers as such. This is something, as an example, when I look outside, what I see quite often, brands doing as a mistake. But of course, if you're only there for the short term, it might work, but not in the long run.
Yeah, okay. But then would you say that you would still suggest to work with influencers, or is something that say...
of course. I'm not against that, but there are influencers, creators, ambassadors out there who driven by strong values, but they need to 100% fit to your brand, what you stand up for, right? So I think that's not so easy.
No, I know. We spoke about it. I worked a bit in influencer marketing, and often was the case that brands, they didn't really care much about that specific match in terms of values even, which is also very difficult to get if you don't have direct access to the influencers as well, if you don't know them, who they are, what they think.
Exactly,
we actually had sportwear brand, and they wanted to have this ambassador, and for them was like, we want an ambassador that is comfortable with different kind of sports, but But it doesn't really matter if he's not an expert, as long as he's happy to try it out. And then we actually went on a road trip with this influencer, and the influencer on paper, he said, yeah, I'm happy to try everything. And then he was so unhappy, and he was such not a sporty person that we had to hire someone else to shoot what he was supposed to do. So at the end, from an influencer campaign, it became like a very traditional campaign, and we lost all the value of it. So I think that was a really good lesson. But I did a very good campaign, a road trip, because of that brand. So that was really fun.
Nice.
But I wonder, when you look at community, right? That's obviously something that's important to build, and there's reasons for it. But when you look at it from more of a marketing perspective, and you need to say, okay, we need to build community, how do you evaluate the community? Are there like KPIs to evaluate, if your community is growing, how engaged they are, or what do you look at?
Community is a word, right? I mean, it stands as a placeholder for, in my opinion, also for quite loyal customers, right? As well. And as we are talking, brands which are there for the long run, these brands are usually built on quite, a loyal customer base. It's an ideal case that you have a big customer base community who go the extra mile for you, right? Who speak up for you, who get in conversations with you. You as a brand, you provide a platform for it, right? They're out there as your advocates, and you can measure how many active consumers do you have, for instance. What's your NPS score? Very classic measures. And of course, it's important that you see that a growth there, a healthy growth going further as well. Then, of course, engagement is important, overarching. And then still, what's very slow measure is the whole awareness. That's what you want to also grow. It's a whole dashboard of different KPIs in order to really get an idea, are you really successful with your community? But in the end, it comes all back again, to a highly involved group of fans, who just fight for you as well as a brand.
I guess they would fight for you if they believe your point of view and your values, right? And you said before that a brand that wants to be relevant needs to have a strong point of view. And I'm sure there are many cases where that happens, but there are also many cases where, at least you hear in the media, right? Like brands take a very strong stand, but then when something happens or revenue actually go down, they kind of fold. It's like, no, maybe we weren't really sure about that. So that's a risk. And I guess because you have, pressure to perform and so on. How do you go about having a strong point of view and making sure that stays even when the market is changing, even when the conditions are changing? Like from your perspective as a marketer.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be always political, right, as well, right? And you don't necessarily always have to be an activist brand, right? So that's also something, you have to a little bit look into that, what kind of brand you are. But first of all, it starts, what do you really stand for? And can look differently, right? When I worked for Adidas Originals, that was all about, empowering creativity in the world. You can stand for that. You can fight for creativity. You can empower creativity. With Fjällräven, it was all about value nature, sustainability, and empower a long-term approach as well. But still, it's important, you said it right, to actively speak about that. And that's something, it needs some guts as well, because you always polarize. When you start to have a point of view, you get also heat back, right? And you have to argue, and you will lose some people, but you will gain so much more. That's important. But again, it depends a little bit what kind of brand you are and how verbal you are. You don't have to be a hardcore activist only. Just take Fjällräven. We realized, hey, we really want to speak more up, and stand our ground. People had lots of questions then, of course, right? Or challenged us. That meant as well that we need to get into conversations. You need more resources, because that's so important that you keep the dialogue as well. So it has consequences, and that's kind of like part of it as well. You cannot just talk at people. That means you talk with them, and you have to get into discussions. People, and now we talk about social media, they reach out on all channels. They can be customer service, they can be like in stores, so you need to be also there, right?
Yeah.
Everywhere, and connect the dots. That's also important.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you do that?
It's not so easy, right? How do you, you need to be aligned, brief people, right? And everybody who's in the front line somewhere, it doesn't matter if you work in the retail stores, if you work at the e-com customer service, or you are a community manager in social media, you represent the brand, you're an ambassador. So you need to communicate, educate, and find these people, identify these people, and keep them updated as well, and make them comfortable as well to be in these discussions and conversations.
Okay. In your experience, did you have to educate the rest of the organization about, I don't know, what's the point of view of Fjällräven was on a certain topic, or did they have to be educated on it?
Not necessarily educated, but of course you have to communicate, and it helps, of course, if then from high up the CEO is supporting that. And then now you mentioned Fjällräven, that was the case, right? He was really behind of that as well, and that helps to have him as the main ambassador of that. And you have to repeat and repeat and repeat, and bring people on board.
And I guess that's the difficult job, and especially with brand. Obviously, everything we talked about requires time, energy, investment, and most likely, investment in the long term. There are certain things that you're not going to be able to measure in a very short time. And many companies, they also work that they need to see performance in the short time, or you go through different economic moments, so you have that pressure to perform. How do you manage to, let's say, talk to your CFOs or your CEO to make that case for brand?
In the end, it's all about, we all get measured by growth, sales growth, right? And you will not exist if you only deliver in 10 years. But the question is, again, are you here for short-term growth or for long-term growth? And if you take loyal consumers, I mean, if you dive deep, you know that they actually are the ones who purchase most often and bring in most money. Still, you need also get new ones. It's all about the balance, right? Yeah. And it requires, when you work for brands with a long-term view, you're looking for steady growth, healthy growth, profitable growth. And usually the leadership team and people also from finance to sales understand that we all have to deliver short-term targets as well, but the questions is about expectations.
Yeah. You mentioned before, now going back to the topic of building community and trends, that some brands, they jump on trends, and that's not community building. We're not going to name any brand, but can you spot that? Can you see this brand, I think they're just in for the short
I
run?
think I can spot that.
Yeah, and how do you do that?
Yeah, I think you see or you feel it, right? How authentic it is when you dive into and see how they act, and do they really mean what they say? Are they really deeply connected, or are they just looking for short-term success? If you are working with brands in marketing, I think you get a good sense for that.
I guess you get a feeling for it nowadays.
Yeah, so much. We all exposed to write messages, videos all the time and get targeted. You see and feel what's really authentic. Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about you need to be consistent through the journey, and you need to align different departments and so on. And you had very interesting examples when we talked about this before. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, but in the end, it's all how you go to market, how you execute. I mean, you can have tons of ideas, you can have point of views, you can have a strong community, right? But in the end, the activation needs to be just super strong and very consistent in a way which connects all kind of sales channels with marketing channels, with product as well. And I think for us CMOs, being responsible for marketing, how I see our role is always internally to be the connector. Because in order to be externally consistent, you need to be first of all connected internally, right? I mean, you need to be from e-com, retail, wholesale, to product, to marketing. We need to have the same language. Product communicates as much as content is communicating. And so that's most times the hardest job. And it's not necessarily always marketing, right, who brings the brand idea to life. And the example I would love to share here is, for instance, that was a little bit more than 10 years ago when I was responsible for the global marketing for Adidas Originals. We brought back the Stan Smith. Yeah, you might know the white shoe, At that time, it got distributed, when I joined. I mean, I think it was sold at Decathlon for 40 euros, But before we actually brought it probably back to market, there was a decision internally. It was all about brand repositioning, right? Because before we were all about, heritage, being the oldest, most original brand. But then actually made a conscious decision that we again want to focus more on the progressive element, be the innovator in streetwear, be the most progressive brand. And then as a leadership team, we super closely aligned on it. And the first action we did was actually on the distribution side, that we took the Stan Smith from the market globally and then brought it back a year later, and that was like super brave, very progressive. No one has done it before. Of course, we followed up with communication, we then brought it back through New York Fashion Week and so forth and so forth. But first action was actually sales, who acted very progressive in line with the brand positioning. That's what I mean. I think it needs to be all aligned, from product to distribution to marketing when we talk about having a point of view.
Yeah. I guess it was pretty bold to decide, okay, now...
Yeah, it was bold. And that's what I think so fascinating with sportswear as well. If you do the right thing, you can actually unfold a lot of power. And that, we just took the right decision as well. And then it was the starting point for a bigger movement then as well. Yeah.
Okay, then let's do the 5-round question. What is a community activation that you wish you had come up with?
Yeah. I really love and look up to those brands who go super local and support local initiatives, work with local ambassadors. And I remember back in the days, Lululemon did a fantastic job. Patagonia still is doing a great job in supporting, local, regional sustainability initiatives. And I think that's commitment, right? And it needs really some guts and at least discipline to bring something to life on a global level, right? And I really believe in that. And I think, these are just 2 examples, I think, where I really look up to.
Good. A hill you die on when it comes to brand building.
Yeah, now we talked a lot about community focus, consumer focus, but in the end, you need to be super strict, who you are as a brand as well. And you should have very strict values. And even if you get challenged by your community or there are some wishes, you should not stretch yourself too much. And I think that's the art, right? Finding the right balance. You just need to be super committed, need to understand where you're coming from as a brand, what you stand up with.
What's your go-to book or podcast that's shaping your thoughts at the moment?
I'm at the moment more like a Substack guy. So I don't have this one podcast at the moment, but there is actually really connected to the topic we are discussing today. Substack I'm following, and I just read a latest episode on the way here. It's called Sociology of Business. Sorry, my German English, and you should check it out. Super interesting. It's all about broader aspect of culture, brands, society.
Okay.
I find it quite interesting.
Okay. Thank you. Nice. Thank you so much for today's chat. I think there's a lot that I'm going to take with me, but mostly, what you explain about how to build a culturally relevant brand in the right way through, I would say, 3 main pillars: the community, having a strong point of view, and also being consistent amongst all the touch points. And I really like what you said about the most important thing is that you need to ask yourself this question as a brand: am I in for the long run or the short run? Because you can't build a brand as culturally relevant if you're in for the short run. So thank you so much, Alex, for today. It was really a pleasure, and I hope you also enjoyed.
Yes, I enjoyed it very much. Thank you very much. It's always a good moment, to reflect as well why you are doing what you are doing, and that's, thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, and thank you for the passion.
Thank you.